Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Ukraine says Russia has launched an attack on its capital, injuring at least 15 people. One of the biggest attacks in the war, Kyiv was hit severely as ballistic missiles and drones hit the city. Local health authorities report Israeli attacks killed 76 people in Gaza in ground and air offensives. The UN chief calls for more aid to be safely delivered to starving Gazans. Antonio Guterres says Gaza war in cruelest phase as aid trucks are stuck. Trump declares he's not looking for a deal with the EU, doubling down on 50% tariff threat as European stock markets nosedive. Meanwhile, the EU urges a trade agreement grounded in respect, not threats. A fifth round of US-Iran nuclear talks end in Rome. Officials comment it was complicated but constructive. Iran calls talks the most professional yet as US officials cite progress amid tensions surrounding uranium enrichment. The IMF says another review into Pakistan funding is expected in the second half of 2025 as economic pressures mount after the deadly Pahalgam terror attack. Meanwhile, the IMF has warned Pakistan to not misuse the bailout funds. Harvard is under fire as the Trump administration alleges Chinese influence. A U.S. judge temporarily blocks a move to revoke foreign student enrollment amid a rift over alleged anti-Semitism on campus. U.S. lifts key sanctions on Syria, authorizing transactions with government entities. Rubio waives Caesar Act for 180 days as Trump demands Syria expel foreign militants. Australia begins massive flood cleanup after deadly floods this week killed 5 and damaged 10,000 properties. Prime Minister Albanese promises ongoing support as floodwaters inundate towns. Reports say 50,000 people are still isolated. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has stated that only new sanctions on Russia will force Moscow to agree to a ceasefire. He also emphasized that the recent Russian bombardments shows the world that Moscow is prolonging the war. Overnight, Ukraine's Air Force successfully downed 6 ballistic missiles and 245 drones in a massive Russian aerial attack on Kyiv. The attack rocked the city with explosions, triggering fires across multiple districts and injuring at least 2 people. Kyiv remains on high alert as Russia launched a combined drone and missile strike, targeting residential areas. Eyewitnesses captured the loud explosions and debris flew through the air. Mayor Vitaly Klitschko confirmed that several residential buildings were hit, including those in Solomyansky and Dniprovsky districts. Meanwhile, Russia and Ukraine have begun the largest prisoner swap of the war, exchanging 390 soldiers and civilians. Ukrainian President Zelensky vowed to bring back all citizens and soldiers held by Russia. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stated that Moscow is ready to present peace terms to Ukraine after the prisoner swap is completed. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi described the ongoing nuclear talks with the United States as complicated but expressed hope for progress. After this 5th round of talks in Rome, Araghchi called the discussions the most professional so far. He emphasized that while challenges remain, the negotiations are moving in a reasonable direction. Here's what the Iranian Foreign Minister has said.
این ادوار مذاکراتی بود که تا الان داشتیم و خب ما یک بار دیگه مواضع و اصول جمهوری اسلامی رو در خصوص مذاکرات بیان کردیم. مواضع ما کاملا روشن هست و ما بر اونها ایستادگی داریم. فکر می‌کنم الان یک درک بهتری و روشن‌تری از مواضع ما در نزد طرف آمریکایی وجود داره.
While Iran was calling these talks complicated, on the other hand, a senior U.S. official also described the talks as constructive and noted that both sides agreed to meet again soon. Despite the progress, significant hurdles still exist, including Iran's uranium enrichment and demands for sanctions relief. The talks mediated by Oman aim to resolve a decades-long dispute over Iran's nuclear program. Arakchi reiterated Iran's stance on its right to enrich uranium. While the U.S. pushes for limits, both sides are now reviewing proposals and preparing for the next round of discussions. The location for the next round of talks will be confirmed soon. Attacks by IDF have killed at least 76 people in Gaza. Blasts were heard as Israel resumed air and ground operations. No comment was made by the Israeli military till now. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said the operations will end with Israel controlling the Gaza Strip. The UN chief warned of the cruelest phase for Palestinians as the humanitarian situation deteriorates and aid remains low. Over a dozen aid trucks were looted in southern Gaza. Aid delivery remains low, with only a small fraction of necessary supplies reaching the region. Antonio Guterres called on Israel to allow more aid to enter on the ground in Gaza. Families remain struggling with basic needs like food and water in short supply. The latest reports from Gaza's health ministry put the death toll since March at over 3,600, bringing the total number of lives lost in this conflict to more than 53,000 people, the majority of which are civilians. U.S. President Donald Trump threatened Apple and other smartphone manufacturers with a 25% tariff unless their devices are built in the United States. Trump initially said the tariff would apply only to Apple, an unusual move to single out a specific company in trade policy. However, he later expanded the threat to include all smartphone makers while Apple designs its products in the United States. Most iPhone assembly occurs in China, which remains embroiled in trade war with the United States. Apple has launched plans to shift some production to other countries, including India. But Trump said this would not satisfy his demands. In a post on Truth Social, Trump wrote that he had long ago informed Tim Cook of Apple that he expects their iPhones that will be sold in the United States of America to be manufactured and built in the United States, not India or any other place. Apple's main rival, South Korea's Samsung, finds itself in a similar situation with most of its production in Vietnam, China, and India. The constant pressure from the White House has taken a toll on Apple's stock price. Other smartphone companies are likely to take a hit as well. U.S. President Donald Trump has rekindled his trade war with the European Union. He has threatened over 50% tariffs. Trump first raised the issue of EU tariffs in an early morning post on his Truth Social network. He doubled down later in the day, telling reporters in the Oval Office that there was nothing the 27-nation bloc could do to change his mind. While adding to this, Trump also denied that his tariffs would hurt American businesses. Let's in fact listen in.
I'm not looking for a deal. I mean, we've set the deal, it's at 50%. But again, there is no tariff if they build their plant here. Now, if somebody comes in and wants to build a plant here, I can talk to them about a little bit of a delay. But, while they're building their plant, which is something I think that would be appropriate, maybe, we'll determine that.
Trump imposed sweeping tariffs on most of the world on what he called Liberation Day on April 2nd, with a baseline 10% plus steeper duties, including a 20% levy on the EU. Markets were thrown into turmoil but calmed after he paused the bigger tariffs for 90 days. Trump has since claimed some early successes in deals struck with Britain and with China, the world's second biggest economy, but talks with the EU have failed to make much progress, with Brussels recently threatening to hit US goods worth nearly 100 billion euros with tariffs if it does not lower the duties on European goods. Wall Street's main indexes were all down around 1% 2 hours into trading, with the tech-heavy Nasdaq at one stage losing 1.5% before rallying, while Apple shares sank 2.5%. The EU's trade chief said the bloc would work for a trade deal with Washington based on respect, not threats. Fresh details have come in about Operation Sindoor, India's military response after the Pahalgam terror attack. Reports say the Indian Air Force launched precision airstrikes on the night of May 10th. These strikes targeted key Pakistani military installations. Following the attacks, Pakistan urgently reached out to the US for help in brokering a ceasefire. The IAF struck 4 major Pakistani air bases. An airborne early warning system was destroyed. Several air defense systems were also taken out. Rafale jets launched Scalp missiles. Su-30 MKI jets fired BrahMos missiles. The main target was the Northern Air Command's control center at the Noor Khan base in Chaklala. Strikes were also carried out at Jagobabad and Bolari. India used its S-400 air defense system stationed in Adampur. It shot down a Pakistani Saab 2000 AWACS aircraft flying deep inside Pakistani territory, about 315 kilometers in. Sources say India has proof of downing several Pakistani aircrafts, including a C-130J transport plane, a JF-17 and 2 F-16 fighter jets, both in the air and on the ground. The IAF also targeted Chinese-made defense systems. The HQ-9 was hit in Karachi. In Lahore, a Happy drone destroyed the LY-80 system. Meanwhile, the Indian Navy was on high alert. Naval ships had moved to a position 260 miles off of Pakistan's Makran coast. They were ready to strike the Karachi naval port on the morning of May 10th, despite threats from Pakistan's DGMO warning of retaliation if BrahMos missiles were used. Indian leadership stood firm. By afternoon, Pakistan requested a no-attack pact. Intercepted communications later revealed that Pakistan had launched a military operation named Bunyan al-Marsus. It was meant to target Indian air bases within 48 hours, but the plan was dropped within hours after India's strong response. Pakistan then sought a ceasefire. Bangladesh's interim leader, who took over after a mass uprising last year, is set to meet key parties pressuring his government today, days after he reportedly threatened to quit. This comes as Muhammad Yunus called for rival political parties to give him their full support. His press secretary Shafiqul Alam has confirmed Yunus would meet leaders of the Bangladesh Nationalist Party as well as leaders of Jamaat-e-Islami, the Muslim-majority nation's largest Islamist party. According to reports, no agenda for the talks has been released. The BNP, reportedly seen as the frontrunners in elections, are pushing heavily for polls to be held by December. These would be the first elections since a student-led revolt forced then Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to flee in August 2024. Yunus, who has led the country after returning from exile at the behest of protesters, says he has a duty to implement democratic reforms before elections. Yunus has said polls could be held as early as December, but that holding them later with a deadline of June would give more time for those changes. Let's hear it from Joshua Barnes, correspondent and on NewsX World live from Delhi. Joshua, what can you tell me more about the developments taking place?
Absolutely. Well, this situation, of course, stems from August 2024, when former leader of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, was ousted, of course, fleeing to India, and Muhammad Yunus was put in temporary charge of Bangladesh interim rule. Now, during this time, there, of course, has been instability, and there remains instability in Bangladesh, and a big fear is that if Yunus does step down, then this will leave a big hole in terms of leadership in Bangladesh. Now, there is reported discussions that have been going on between Muhammad Yunus and the military, which is powerful within Bangladesh. Some reports say that they haven't always seen eye to eye. It's clear Muhammad Yunus is looking for stronger support from all political parties ahead of any potential vote. This unity that he's called for, building a stable base and some groundwork before a potential election, which he said may happen as early as December this year, but could always happen further into 2026 as well. I think the fear for many is without Yunus, without the stability, with Sheikh Hasina and also not in the country, it could lead to mass instability in the nation, potential military power that could move forward, also other powers, other parties as well, a very strong Islam core in Bangladesh as well, and big Muslim power parties. So there is a fear that if Muhammad Yunus wasn't staying in power, if he did leave, as he has threatened, then a period of instability. But as it stands, he will remain in place. It's one we will, of course, keep an eye on.
Building on that point that you've just mentioned, what will happen in the case if Yunus actually decides to leave the office?
Well, in that instance, we of course would be entering a period of instability. We know, of course, he is a temporary ruler. We would potentially be looking at somebody else needing to come in, but a massive period of instability, a massive period of uncertainty. It's not clear who would rise to that position. Would there be an election called? I doubt it. I think the next election will be set up with Yunus in power.
We appreciate your insight. You will stay with us for our next story. In the latest turn of events in India-Pakistan conflict, India has accused Pakistan of sponsoring decades of terror attacks, including the 2008 Mumbai attacks and the recent massacre of tourists in Pahalgam. During a strong statement delivered at the United Nations Security Council, speaking at an open debate on the protection of civilians in armed conflict, India's permanent representative to the UN Ambassador Parvatanen Harish slammed Pakistan for making baseless allegations and pointed to a long history of cross-border terrorism backed by Islamabad. He stated that the primary targets of Pak-sponsored attacks have been civilians, with the clear intent of undermining India's progress, prosperity, and morale. Let's listen in.
Mr. President, I'm constrained to respond to the baseless allegations of the representative of Pakistan on a number of issues. First, India has experienced decades of Pakistani-sponsored terrorist attacks across our borders. This has ranged from the horrific 26/11 attack on the city of Mumbai to the barbaric mass murder of innocent tourists in Pahalgam in April 2025. The victims of Pakistani terrorism have been predominantly civilians, since its objective has been to attack our prosperity, our progress, and our morale. For such a nation to even participate in a discussion on protection of civilians is an affront to the international community. Second, Pakistan has repeatedly used a civilian cover to advance the cause of terrorism. We just recently saw senior government, police, and military officials pay respects at the funeral of noted terrorists targeted by Operation Sindoor. A nation that makes no distinction between terrorists and civilians has no credentials to speak about protecting civilians.
These comments follow heightened tensions after the Pahalgam terror attack that claimed 26 lives. India hit back with airstrikes on May 7, targeting terror camps in Pakistan and POK. Pakistan's retaliatory attempts over the next 3 days ended after military talks and a ceasefire on May 10th. The International Monetary Fund has announced that its next funding review for Pakistan will take place in the second half of 2025, with ongoing discussions underway to finalize the 2026 fiscal budget. The IMF emphasized the need to control inflation, aiming to keep it within the central bank's 5 to 7% medium-term target. Pakistani officials remain committed to fiscal consolidation, targeting a primary budget surplus of 1.6% of GDP. Following a successful review, the IMF approved $1 billion in aid, confirming Pakistan met all targets under the Extended Fund Facility. However, 11 new structural conditions have been imposed amid concerns that rising tensions with India could undermine fiscal and reform goals. Now we move on to North America. A U.S. judge has temporarily blocked the Trump administration from revoking Harvard University's ability to enroll foreign students. The decision halts a policy that could have impacted over 7,000 visa holders, causing significant disruption at the prestigious school. Harvard argued that the move was in retaliation for its refusal to align with Trump's political agenda and a violation for its academic independence. The administration cited national security concerns, but the judge ruling offers temporary relief while legal proceedings continue. Harvard has warned that the policy could severely damage its academic programs and finances. Meanwhile, the Chinese government said that the move to ban international students from Harvard would damage America's global reputation, with students and parents overseas expressing their concern. Syria has welcomed the U.S. decision to lift sanctions, calling it a positive step towards recovery. The move follows the end of Bashar al-Assad's regime and opens the door for new investments. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent stated the lifting aims to promote stability and prosperity in Syria. The decision announced by President Trump comes after pressure from Turkey and Saudi Arabia. Sanctions relief is conditional on Syria ensuring the safety of minorities and preventing terrorist havens. The U.S. State Department has also issued a waiver to allow foreign partners to support Syria's reconstruction, including essential services like electricity, water, and sanitation. With sanctions lifted, the U.S. aims to foster a new relationship and promote lasting peace. Now we have Joshua Barnes joining us as correspondent from NewsX World Live. Thank you for staying with us. Joshua, can you tell me more about the developments taking place?
Yes, absolutely, Asuma. Before we look at these sanctions and the lifting of them, we need to get more of an understanding about the state of play in Syria. Of course, a country that has been in the grips of a civil war for over a decade. Of course, following the ousting of Bashar al-Assad, al-Shara forming a new temporary government, and it's generally been seen as a positive move following the ousting of Bashar al-Assad, who of course was a leader who was overseeing several reported atrocities, but also division within Syria. Now the new government has come in. They've said it may take 4 years for a proper election, but al-Shara is leading that government. He himself, a former member of a group which was once affiliated with Al-Qaeda, and there are fears from global leaders about extremism in Syria. And you mentioned there, of course, the minority attacks, which have been sporadic but still there in recent months following Bashar al-Assad's ousting. We look at the Druze community as one group who have been involved in conflict. But this really is about Syria rebuilding. The country has been hit economically, has been damaged. There are hundreds of thousands of unexploded devices across the country. and the economy is in a real dire state. It will take about 80 years at the current trajectory for it to return to where it was before the civil war and the Assad regime. The economic situation is dire, and of course a country that is looking to rebuild with a new leadership and move in a positive direction needs all the support it can get. And we have seen sanctions be lifted by other countries. The EU have done so. France have been in direct communications with Syria, and it seems that the UN are moving forward. Of course, there was that surprise meeting between al-Sharaa and Donald Trump in recent days, and this has clearly led to a forward movement from the US, which will see the start of sanctions being lifted. The ramifications will be huge if they are fully lifted, and the implementation will allow Syria to hopefully build moving forward. But there does remain those key concerns about the treatment of minorities and also the potential rise of terrorist organisations and extremist organisations in a country that has been ravaged by war for so long. This could be a very positive move for all involved, and the new Syrian government will be hoping to turn this into a positive and move forward without sanctions from not just the US but the other countries and organisations that I mentioned.
Thank you very much, Joshua Barnes, and we move on to our next story. Tens of thousands remain isolated across New South Wales as floodwaters slowly recede after days of record-breaking rain. Authorities report that up to 10,000 properties have been damaged in Australia, with over 550,000 people still affected by the crisis. Power outages continue in several regions, and more than 20 emergency warnings remain active. The death toll has risen to 5 after the body of an elderly man was found near Tariff, one of the worst hit towns. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, unable to visit due to dangerous conditions, reaffirmed federal support for ongoing relief and recovery efforts. Over 600 flood rescues were carried out in the last 3 days. NSW Premier Chris Minnis praised emergency services, saying their courage prevented what could have been hundreds of deaths. Authorities continue to deliver essential supplies by land, air, and water. Residents are warned to avoid floodwaters due to hidden dangers like electricity, snakes, and health hazards from stagnant water. Scientists link the frequency of such extreme weather events to climate change. Now we move to Asia. South Korea has expressed concerns to China over the establishment of a no-sail zone in the Yellow Sea, an area where the two countries' exclusive economic zones overlap. The zone, which China has declared until May 27th, restricts ships from entering certain parts of the sea, reportedly for military training purposes. South Korea's foreign ministry stressed that while both nations are allowed to conduct military drills in the shared zone, China's move raises concern about excessive restrictions on navigation. South Korea has praised these concerns and is coordinating with its defense ministry to assess if China's actions comply with international maritime law. Additionally, Beijing has reportedly set up 3 structures in the area, which it claims are aquaculture facilities, leading to speculation about China's broader maritime ambitions. Now we move on to North America. A U.S. federal judge has ordered the Trump administration to facilitate the return of a Guatemalan man who was deported to Mexico despite fearing persecution there. The case highlights a serious mistake in his deportation process, with officials acknowledging that they failed to assess his safety concerns. The man, identified as OCG, is a gay Guatemalan who fled death threats in 2024 after being deported to Mexico, where he had previously been raped and kidnapped. OCG chose to go into hiding rather than face further detention in Mexico. The judge called the situation a horror and emphasized that the administration failed to provide the due process required by law. This ruling adds to other instances where the Trump administration has been ordered to reverse wrongful deportations. The top U.S. diplomat in Havana, Mike Hammer, has vowed more sanctions on Cuba following the U.S. government's recent action against Cuban judicial officials. On Wednesday, the Trump administration barred 3 Cuban judges and a prosecutor from entering the U.S. for their involvement in jailing political dissidents. Hammer emphasized that these sanctions are just the beginning. He also stated that the Cuban regime, not the U.S., is responsible for the island's ongoing economic crisis. Cuba has accused Hammer of trying to stir up resentment, but he has continued his efforts to engage with the Cuban people despite government's opposition. Now we move on to Asia. A police helicopter crashed in Thailand's Prachuap-Khiri Khan province, at least killing 3 people. The report suggests that the Bell 212 helicopter was on a training mission when it went down around p.m. local time near the Wing 5 Air Force Base. 2 pilots and a flight mechanic died. The status of the person who parachuted to safety is not yet known. In a similar incident on April 25th, a small police aircraft crashed into the sea near Hua Hin Airport, resulting in the deaths of all 6 officers on board. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.